Hello and welcome back. This lesson is all about plot. Now, I want to stress that what I present here is not a full plot structure, but just the most important common plot elements of a novel. There's the beginning, the inciting incident or displacement, the learning curve, the middle, the climax, and the resolution. Now, there are many ways to start a novel, but all need to hook the reader and make them connect with the character. A prologue gives the reader some backstory or insight into what has happened to get the point to the story, or it may hint at something which affects the main character later. A snapshot is used to show briefly the main character's life before the event. And we can also drop the reader right into the action, as these three are the most common beginnings. No matter what technique is used, it should always start with a hook and immediately get the reader invested in the character through what's happened or happening to them and possibly their emotional response. A great hook makes the reader ask questions in the first sentence or two and can possibly contain a hint that something good or bad will happen. For example, my dreams were crushed. It felt like a boa was squeezing the last breath of hope from me. So here we're going to have the reader probably ask questions as what were her dreams, how and why were they crushed, and why was it her last hope? These questions make the reader keep reading. And this provides a connection between the character and reader through her crushed dreams and the feeling of losing hope. Now prepare yourself for a gruesome crime thriller example. The hooded figure chuckled at the blood-spattered room. The body that lay on the floor was their latest artwork. They'd never seen such fine cuts, such expert placement of each organ. They inhaled the metallic, imputed sense of this human disembowelment. Shaking their head, they thought of the previous times they fooled McLean, the investigator, then left the woman exposed so purely for her husband to find. So here we see maybe the antagonist or the protagonist. This question of which one we're seeing is going to be in the reader's mind. Maybe even how many times has this person killed before? Are they doing it partly to taunt the investigator or just a side effect of what they love to do? The more questions you have, the better. Even with this terrible scene, the reader can relate to the expert precision, art, their desire to fool somebody again. These things will make them bond to this character slightly. I'm not saying it's going to be a full deep bond at this point. So this example, Joel felt his hair move as the part human, part machine clicked the scissors too close to his face. Here the reader will want to know why there's a half human, half machine threatening Joel. Did he do something wrong? Is his life in danger? Or is he just scared of getting a haircut? Here, the emotional bond is created through fear. So when you're assessing the hook, as long as you feel hooked and an emotional attachment to them in the first couple of sentences, a prologue, snapshot, or action will work. Let's take a look at the prologue technique first. Prologues usually serve as a quick reveal of backstory, but they still must have that hook. The prologue can't just tell the reader about the planet, the different species that live in it, and what all they believe in. It needs to be an exciting introduction. The Dream Thieves has a simple prologue hook. A secret is a strange thing. So this example uses secret and strange to get us interested. Everyone wants in on a secret, right? But why is it a strange thing? You'll have to read to find out. Here's another example. Amber stood watching the fire engulf her quaint cottage, thinking about how much work she'd put in to making it her home. Now, having someone standing and observing or even thinking isn't a great hook. While the fire works as a subtle one, let's see how we can make it better. Fire rampaged around Amber's quaint cottage, destroying everything she held dear. The life she worked so hard to create was gone in minutes. Gone were the bluebells she planted in this spring. Gone was the wooden door she hung by herself, the blue and yellow window dressings she'd sewn, the rocking chair she'd spent days getting the petals and leaves on the 25 trilliums she'd carved into the headrest. So this time the hook comes first. The rampaging fire is going to be what pulls the reader in and want to know more. It's better than just standing, which is static. Chapter 1 for this example may pick up a year or 10 years later and show how this event affected her. But the prologue here is giving a quick picture of her life before, while the fire is raging. On a warm autumn day, the sun filtered through the orange and gold leaves, creating flashes of light on those that had fallen. This example doesn't really have a hook. It's not very interesting. Now, literary fiction can start like this, but there still should be something that hooks the reader in. I mean, in this case, there isn't even a character added to bond with. The rewrite. Autumn was when my life changed forever, and not for the better. I remember the sun. See how that addition entices the reader to ask questions and gives the reader a reason to know about that particular sunshiny day. Sometimes a prologue can serve as a hint to something that will affect the main character later, like the murder scene in the prior example will likely affect McLean, or it could possibly be something less sinister, like giant metal spikes pierced the forest floor, a hatch opened, and 4 figures foreign to the planet descended the stairs. Later, the main character is going to meet these aliens and be told that their entire life was planned out by these strangers, and that everything that made the main character feel different from everyone else will be explained. Prologues like this let the reader in on something the main character doesn't know. However, where the reason for the prologue is revealed, it should be far enough into the story that the reader forgets or almost forgets that the prologue even existed. Whether it's backstory or a hint at something later in the book, we're looking for ways a prologue can be an exciting introduction. If the prologue is chock full of backstory or setting description, consider how changing something will make the reader ask questions. Consider if the book might be better starting with chapter 1 and sprinkling in the details from the prologue throughout the first part of the book. Removing something as big as the prologue should be made after some critical thinking because it's a big change. But if it will improve the book, it should be done. And if the prologue hints at something that will affect the character later, make sure the reveal is far enough away from that the reader will forget or almost forget it even existed. If it's not far enough in, see if there's a place where it could be moved to a little bit later in the book. The next up is the snapshot technique. You could start with a snapshot of the character's life before something happens which shakes them up. This technique reveals backstory in a very quick way. 1 or 2 scenes to 1 chapter at most. Like the character walks out of their house, gets a cup of coffee at their favorite cafe before heading to work. This short introduction should contain pertinent information about the character's life. The reader doesn't need to know everything that they see and do and wear. And there should be at least a hint at something is different or is going to happen soon, and this will pique the reader's interest. That day, Holly got up at 6:15 like she did every day, put on her uniform and walked the 5 blocks to her favorite coffee shop. She ordered her usual mint chocolate cappuccino and arrived at work at a punctual 7 a.m. She performed her administrative duties at Nexcon until noon with precision. So we see her usual day, but now we're going to interrupt it. At lunch, she ate alone at her table in the courtyard, a ham and cheese on rye and a soda. After zipping her lunch bag, she stood up and back straight into... So we don't know who she's going to back up into at this point. And there aren't many details about her life or her job, but we do get hints as to what there are, her personality, and her routine. The specifics, if they are important, can be filled in later. The story could possibly start with action, in the middle of a gunfight, or possibly even with the inciting incident. The main character could be in battle, their sword striking the shoulder of their opponent, while the dagger just misses their throat. Or it could begin with some action where the main character isn't actively engaged. This is a passive action scene. Let's take a look. His breath coming hard and fast, Jackson crouched behind a whiskey barrel. The sounds of the swords clashing made him shiver, and the smell of the carnage turned his stomach into a bucking bull. So Jackson is actually out of the fight, but there are hints that the battle is going on without him by what he's hearing and what he's smelling. Dialogue is considered an action beginning. So let's take a look at this one. Olive will be here soon with the report on Vineyard. What would you like me to tell her, General? Amelia turned to her second in command. Put her in the cell. I'll deal with her later. She waved him away and went back to the map of the colonies. What's revealed in this scene is that Olive is under Amelia, and she's either been in Vineyard or gathered information on it. Amelia is dismissive of Olive, potentially angry with her by putting her in a cell. And she must have more important things to do involving the map. So we still have questions during this dialogue scene. So that's what we're aiming for, and then possibly an emotional connection to Amelia. Let's see what starting with the inciting incident looks like. Elsie was sucked into a swirl of colors. She felt like her body was being torn apart. Her arms stretched, her legs twisted in all the wrong places. She thought her head was going to explode right before she was spat out. So this is starting with the inciting incident. The life-changing event happens in the first sentence, and it's great for pulling the reader in fast. Of course, what caused this event will be revealed later, probably in the next paragraph. Whatever the technique, make sure it has a great hook by making them ask questions. The more questions they have, the more they will want to buy the book. It should also spark an emotional bond between the character and the reader. If it doesn't, just leave a little comment and idea about how that could be improved. If you notice a lot of backstory in the beginning, you can even consider starting the book closer to the inciting incident and fill in those details later. If a prologue is used as a hint and the reveal isn't far enough away, make a suggestion to place it further into the novel that the reader forgets or almost forgets that it even existed. The snapshot technique as the main character's life should reveal a bit of background but still hint that something's going to happen soon. If it doesn't, go ahead and make a suggestion on how to make the reader want to keep reading. The beginning is where a lot of changes might need to be made, from simply adding a sentence to restructuring paragraphs or even cutting the prologue or chapters. You might even change it a few times before it feels right. But you want your readers to have a great experience and have them enjoy reading your novel. So even if you have to change the beginning 10 times, go ahead and do it. It's fine. A lot of authors do. Next up is the inciting incident. This is where the main character should be pushed into a different situation. It should be life-changing and shake the main character and their understanding of the world to the core. If it isn't big enough, the entire book will suffer and readers' expectations won't be met. Recently, I read a story where the main character got their 4th magical ability. It was the first book in a series, so the incident didn't feel drastic enough. This incident should be something that the main character hasn't dealt with before, and it should make them take actions that they wouldn't have. Maybe they move from the country to the city, or they lose a parent. Enter graduate high school, maybe an asteroid hits their backyard and they're altered by the contents. Whatever the event, it should be as big as possible. Sci-fi could have the characters already on their journey in space, heading to another planet for peace talks. It opens with a dinner scene where people are talking about what they're planning on doing. They go from their jobs and back to their quarters, then the main character can see parts of the ship floating by. End of chapter 1. Or we could start with them feeling the attack, the warning sirens going off, and seeing the debris. Instead of peace talks, they're now in battle. In either case, the inciting incident changes the circumstances drastically and quickly. Their peaceful journey of settling a dispute has just turned into a fight. The character isn't used to battle and will now have to make decisions and take actions they haven't had to their entire lives. The life-changing event should happen in chapter 1. The sooner the better, but at the latest it's the cliffhanger for the first chapter. In some novels I've edited, we've even placed the inciting incident on page 1 to get the reader excited and involved on the first page. But the placement of the inciting incident can vary for genres. For instance, sci-fi, fantasy, horror, and crime usually happen pretty fast, while literary fiction and romance may have the event closer to the end of the chapter. Let's say in romance, a character is heading to France to start anew after a terrible divorce. Now we could show her sparring with her husband before signing the papers and then immediately heading to the airport. While on the plane, she thinks about what led up to the divorce and the terrible things her ex-spouse put her through. At the end of the chapter, the plane lands and someone helps her pull the luggage from the overhead. She looks over and can't believe how drawn she is to the person standing next to her. She doesn't know it, but meeting this person will change her life in ways she didn't know were possible, and it will cause her to do things she hasn't before, or even possibly thought of before. You want to make sure this life-changing event is drastic enough and causes the main character to take actions or make decisions that they wouldn't have before the incident. If not, you're going to comment on it and suggest how the incident could be larger and more impactful. The incident should happen in the first chapter, the sooner the better for many fiction genres. If the incident doesn't happen by the end of chapter 1, note it and consider making it at least the cliffhanger. Next up is the learning curve. The learning curve is where things get fun. So after the main character gets thrust into a new situation, we need to have them learn about the world. Because as the character learns how to navigate, the reader learns with them. So there's going to be a lot of ups and downs in this section, the trials and errors. They're going to win some challenges and lose some challenges. Consider if you were to suddenly have light ray shooting from your eyes. Is that something you would need to get a handle on? You probably ruin a few things and have trouble turning it on and off. Same goes for the characters when they are in somewhere new or experiencing things that they haven't. Maybe the main character loses a parent. They're going to have a lot of things to deal with. Legal matters, taking care of the other parent, living without the person who was probably their rock. It's an imperative and exciting step that shouldn't be skipped over. Remember the main character who got their 4th magical ability at the beginning of book 1? Since they had already had a handle on the first 3, the learning curve felt very disappointing. If the character doesn't struggle, the reader might find the storyline unbelievable, and there is a risk of losing them as things come too easily for the main character. It should be as hard as possible for them to succeed. It's a hero's journey, after all. And heroes struggle just as much as the rest of us. So let's take a look at the superpower example first. They probably don't understand why they have this power or how to control it, so they should be trying and failing when using it, possibly destroy a few things before they get a handle on it. But they learn about themselves and their new circumstances along the way. Now, if the main character moves from the city to the country, it's a new world situation, and they're going to have to get used to the country way of life. There may be a slower pace, harder labor, Maybe there's only one bar in the nearest town when they're used to clubbing at multiple places in one night. Add in the fact that they have no idea how to run the B&B their grandmother left them, and we're in for a great roller coaster ride. They have to learn the financials, possibly how to cook for guests that arrive on day one, hire somebody to fix the broken porch steps, all while adjusting to a town and people they don't know. Their triumphs and failures during this part will help the reader root for them. Adding in those emotional responses to success and failures also help the reader bond. So the new B&B owner cries when the front door falls off its hinges after dealing with burning fish in the oven, starting a small fire on the stove, and customers complaining about the bathroom. They could also laugh at the way they look in the mirror after cleaning the rooms all day. Maybe she does a little dance when she learns how to cook squab. Her breath catches when a guy at the bar almost kisses her. These emotional responses to overcoming obstacles and being stopped by them add to that up and down feel of the learning curve. So this is what we're watching out for. And that internal and external conflict should keep rising through this section until the middle where things really get tough. When you're editing, if you notice the character knows how to perform a new skill from the start, comment on that. The trials and failures should happen before they achieve something. It creates a more believable and exciting part of the story. We're also going to assess the length of time spent on the learning. Mark where it feels too fast or too slow for the character to learn a new task. Are there scenes which can be added or deleted? If so, go ahead and comment on those, because scene additions and subtractions aren't that difficult to fix. There should be some obstacles that they overcome and others that block them, because they haven't healed that inner wound yet. Their trials will be difficult, but that makes it exciting for the reader, as do the emotional responses by the character. Now, after they get a handle on their new world, it's time for the curveballs, the larger conflicts. The middle can be the trickiest part to write. It's the bridge between the beginning and the climax. If there aren't enough interesting things that are going on, it's going to feel like the story is dragging. To keep things interesting, new conflicts should be added and the stakes raised. Old subplots are tied up and maybe some side characters' problems are resolved. Even adding new characters and new subplots is going to be effective. Let's go back to that main character who inherited the bed and breakfast. So she learned how to cook well enough for the guests and hired a handy person to fix the screen door, the leaky sink in the bathroom, the electricity cutting out. Yay! She gets a visit from the loan officer. Apparently, her grandmother mortgaged the house and she hadn't been paying on it. They are threatening to repossess the bed and breakfast, which means the main character won't have a job or a place to live. The conflicts are rising and the stakes are getting higher. Now she's going to have to increase the cost of the rooms and fire the handy person in order to make the payments. The higher prices are driving away repeat customers. She's never fired anyone before, so she has to struggle with doing that. She needs to learn how to market a business on her own because she can't afford to have someone else do it. These curveballs just keep coming. Her estranged father shows up, who believes the bed and breakfast should have been his, and he wants to help. Obviously, they don't have a good relationship, but hey, he's offering money. She also meets a guy at the local bar and is falling for him. So now she has to figure out how to balance everything. The money troubles, the bank, marketing, bringing in new customers, fixing the bed and breakfast up, and her father. The main character must navigate everything you throw at them. The conflicts, external and internal, make this an exciting part of a book. New subplots and characters are going to keep the reader interested and want to find out how the main character is going to handle all of it. So in my story, my main character is on a quest to stop giants from taking over a neighboring land. On her way to gather the fighters to help, she's told by an old man at the inn that she needs to get a special sword from her mother, which can kill giants with one touch. But her mother's dead. Well, no, she's not. She faked her death. Now, can you see what I did there? I added a subplot, new character, and a shocking twist. If you notice your middle is slow, consider tying up some earlier subplots and mark where you can do this. Are there enough problems for the main character or new characters which add conflict and raise the stakes? If not, make a few suggestions on how you can add more. On the flip side, if you notice there's too much going on, too many characters and subplots that aren't tying well into the main plot. If they don't tie in well, there will be some tough decisions to make. Possibly mark places where things can be cut and an idea about how to keep the story flowing without that character or subplot. It's possible they don't need these to be removed, but maybe simply cut down the time spent on them. So we're going to make sure that these stakes are clearly increased and the conflicts and the curveballs are more difficult for the main character. Now for the climax. This is an epic scene, the one where the main character must use everything they've learned up to this point to defeat the antagonist. Most of the time, the main character is going to win the ultimate battle. It's what readers want and expect in most genres. They've been rooting for the character for the whole novel, and they want them to win. If the main character has a team with them, then the team can battle the antagonist or their team for a while, but the main character should end up on their own, either battling the remnants of the antagonist team or just the antagonists themselves. It's important that the main character be at their lowest point, where winning doesn't seem possible, an inescapable moment where they must make the hardest decision. Do they break their moral code, risk their lives, let love in? Maybe they join the dark side because it appears that it's the only way. It's at this rock bottom moment that they must decide that sparks the climax. Once a decision's made, then they're going to formulate a new plan based, of course, on what they need, and then attack. And probably win. However, in some stories, the main character will choose poorly, or they will lose. And that's a twist that should fit the message. Like, they've tried everything to fight the good fight, but the only way for them to survive is to join the bad guys. Let's take a look at a courtroom climax. The antagonist team of litigators have worked and created a great case, while the protagonist team have struggled and tried everything they can, but on the last day, they have one more chance to convince the jury. They have a terrible decision to make. Do they use their stellar questioning that could discredit the key witness, knowing it would ruin their career? Or do they back off, not take the risk, and let their client down? A Few Good Men, it's that water glass moment, the pause before he turns around and uses everything he learned about the system, the people, and most importantly, himself. The climax begins when he starts the incriminating line of questioning until the ultimate moment where the witness breaks and the attorney wins. Maybe our hero slices their way through 10 people trying to get to the antagonist. Their team is battling out with the rest of the antagonist team when they isolate the bad guy for one-on-one fight. This one-on-one showdown is going to only be a few pages at most, but it should be epic. As I mentioned, the main character doesn't have to win. If they lose, though, it should fit that message. Like, the earth falls into ruin because pollution has been going on for too long. One person cannot beat billions of years of people not caring. When editing, you're going to look for the point where the main character has hit rock bottom, and then make sure they find out what they need. If there isn't that pause, consider adding it to increase the dramatic effect. During the climax, make sure they're using everything that they have learned. If they haven't, see what they aren't using and consider adding it to the scene. Ensure that the climax is big enough and long enough. A battle that takes more than one chapter is going to be too long. The actual climax scene shouldn't be more than a few pages. If it is, think about how you can shorten it. Now, if the main character wins too quickly or too easily, it can hurt the novel as well. So in this case, consider how you can lengthen the battle between the teams or the one-on-one to build a feeling of suspense before that big win or loss. Now on to the resolution. This is a chapter where the loose ends are tied up. And the different endings for different genres will be expected, and this is especially true of romance novels. Romance should have a happily ever after or a happy for now ending. If not, it isn't a romance no matter how many romantic scenes are in the book. For fantasy and sci-fi, the reader expects the journey to be completed. Crime and mystery, the case solved. For a novel in a series, there can be an indication that the saga will continue. It can be a few sentences long. For example, a character just steps into their home, their phone rings, and they look down to see the name displayed. It's a call from their nemesis. There's obviously some problem that they're going to solve or something that their nemesis has done that they have to fix. Now, another technique is an epilogue. The epilogue usually serves to set up the next novel with an indication of another adventure. For example, whatever the characters did during book 1 had unseen consequences, worse than what they stopped from happening in this book. They saved the Juno colony, but now someone's attacking Ajax on the other side of the world. The epilogue scene could be from the perspective of those suffering the consequences. A few scenes of Ajax being attacked and maybe a messenger then sent to the main character. Or, for a crime novel, it could be 3 months later. The main character is at home swimming in their pool and they stop when they see someone standing at the edge with a gun. Epilogues are not only for series novels, they can be for standalones as well. So for a standalone, the epilogue will be where the final loose end is tied up. The couple who struggled throughout the novel is on their second honeymoon, enjoying a wonderful night on the beach with a glass of wine. So when assessing the resolution, we're going to make sure those loose ends are tied up. Everyone's going to want to know that the main character's dog that appeared in chapter 1 survived while they were away. If you find 1 or 2 things that were introduced in the beginning that aren't resolved, go ahead and make a note to yourself for you to come back and tie that loose end up later. So we're looking for a resolution that will satisfy readers' expectations of the genre, and I know you can do this because you know the genre. If it's a series novel and there isn't a setup for the next one, note it. Consider adding at least an additional sentence or scene, but if it doesn't feel right, don't do it. But it can be a great teaser that leaves the reader wanting more. If you happen to end your novel with the end, consider not doing this. It isn't the end for the reader, who will keep the story going in their minds long after they've finished reading. Readers love to keep the story going and even guess at what's going to come next and how they will handle that situation. I wanted to give you a list of books that concentrate on plot structure. These are great for understanding all the plot points and how to create a great plot. That's the end of this lesson. I'll see you next time in Pacing.